Okay, so welcome back to another session of this year edition of the Global Foresight Summit. As you remember, we've been saying this in every session. We are co-organizing this year with the APF and the WFR, the Association of Professional Futurists, and the World Futures Review Journal. And for this session, we have Riel Miller, nothing more and nothing less. So Riel Miller is going to be talking with us for the next 45 minutes, more or less. Most of you already know him. He's the head of Foresight in the UNESCO, and his mission is to turn futures literacy into a global task, capacity, or capability building in the world. So Riel is going to be in the next minutes. He's going to be talking about long-termism and short-termism. So Riel, welcome again, and everything's on your side. Everything's for you.
Thank you, Miguel, and thank you for the kind invitation. It's a privilege to be here. Very glad to see the second year happening. I know the first year we were all scrambling to figure out what's going on and what's this all about. But in fact, at that time, for me, it was a taste of something that I'd been hungry for a very long time, because all of a sudden, the world was much more accessible. And I've been completely, how can I put it, transported, but of course not physically, by the last year's ability to bring people together, and the potential that we now have to be in collaboration in many different ways, not just the ways of face-to-face, not just the ways of heavy investment, not just the ways that are related to the imperative of amortizing the fact that there's been a lot of carbon produced in the airplanes and the hotels for us to be together, but rather to think about things and tasks that we need to do in our own context, within our own reach, and in that sense, place matters. So I'm very glad to be back at this place, a virtual place, and to take advantage of the community that you've been building. And I think it's a testimony and a tribute to the times, but also to the effort that you and your colleagues have made to create a community and to reach out and to build with a great deal of openness and charm the connections and the interest in thinking about the future. So when thinking about what I might say, go ahead, Miguel. Yes.
I said thank you only.
Okay, wonderful. Well, when thinking about what I might say this time around, and given the context, I have to say that I was provoked a little bit by what I feel is a profound blindness, let's call it that, but really missing the point in a sense of what's been going on around thinking about the future. Obviously, if let's imagine that I told you, we're going to have dinner, but I don't want to think about what we're going to eat, because all of a sudden there's no market, there's no way for me to shop, and I can't think about what I'm going to eat. Well, you'd have a very hard time producing the scenario of dinner if you don't know where you're going to get the ingredients. And it's a bit like that in the current context, which is everybody's saying, my God, COVID has ripped away the old normal. We've been talking for quite a bit of time about the new normal, or the post-normal. But But what are we going to actually put in its place? What are we going to fabricate in the way of an objective, a goal, a policy? What decisions should I make? What do I need to take? Where's first of all, where's the menu? And I need to hurry up and actually choose something on the menu. I'm hungry. And people, of course, are very hungry for the kinds of scenarios, images of the future that have been that are essential to everyday functioning. We have to have those images in our heads. Otherwise, we don't even know what to do when we wake up in the morning and get out of bed. Well, what am I going to do? I've no image of the future. Do I brush my teeth? Well, okay, there's an image. Now I'll go do that. I mean, it's of course this need, and it is very short term in that sense, and it's very much about serving our current anxieties, but also providing very practical and tangible survival related ways of deploying the future. To take the example, if you think it's going to rain, you're going to take your umbrella, and you've transformed the image of the future, it's going to rain, into an action, and therefore you've been able to integrate the future into your thinking. But I feel that there's another lesson, in a sense, that hopefully can prevail in the context that we're in, which has to do with not trying to remediate the past, not trying to redress the errors of the old ways of thinking about the future. And of course, there's a lot of anxiety about that, a lot of desire to do that, a lot of, in some senses, guilt and recrimination about, why didn't we listen to the doomsayers who were doomsayers? They were just soothsayers. They were predictors that were right. And why didn't we listen to them? Why didn't we prepare more? Why didn't we stockpile this? Why didn't we stockpile that, etc.? And people in the futures community, know what this is like. The desire to create new scenarios of a more equal post-COVID world, to create scenarios of work after COVID, to create scenarios of COVID and AI, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of options there. And it's not that activity isn't important. I think it's worth doing. But one of the things that I find intriguing, and hopefully the work that we're all trying to do to a certain extent, and particularly the anticipatory systems perspective of futures literacy as a capability, is to park that reflex, let's call it habit, of the way we use the future, and to park it not forever, because we have to use it to make dinner, but to park it from the perspective of thinking about what kind of world we live in, and what our relationship to the world is about, in light of the obvious demonstration of the brittleness and fragility of the way we've used the future in the past. That's the pandemic is just a perfect example. But climate extinction is another message, which, we can take it or leave it. The planet doesn't give a damn. But it says something about a very profound alienation of most members of this species to our relationship to the world around us. And I think that the future is deeply and inextricably and powerfully integrated into that flaw. You could also almost call it a pathology. And it's not new at all. We've been building monuments pretty much every part of the world, whether it's imperial palaces in the East, or pyramids in North Africa, or pyramids in Central America. We've been building symbols and tributes and systems and communities and reproductive orders of power and biology that have been anchored in a form of continuity a form of reproduction of the past into the future, a way of thinking about what makes us feel secure, and a way of thinking about how we play a role in creating the future, that I think essentially cuts us off from the novelty, creativity, mystery, spirituality. I heard in one of the earlier conversations here at the summit. It cuts us off from that, and it lives at the margins, or it lives as a form of dissent or dissidence against the mainstream, the orthodoxy. And I think that, you know, it's clearly untenable in the sense that the decisions and the choices that we construct. So here, perception is crucial. The perception that we have of the world around us, the way we construct our choice menus, the way we approach choice, is deeply flawed by this bias towards immortality, towards the reproduction and conceptions of legacy that are based on preservation, that are based on feeling successful if you're buried in some monument that will then impose itself on the scenery of future generations. Wow, what an incredible success the emperor has had now that this massive monument dominates people's everyday lives going forward. And you know, in a small way, we're all the emperors of concrete this century and the last, but particularly this century. Well, the 21st and 20th century, the amount of concrete we're leaving for future generations, not to mention radioactive waste, makes us the big winners in this legacy race. Wow, we've really had an incredible impact. Forget our ideas or even our tools, but we've just made really solid contributions to the Anthropocene reshaping of the planet, not to mention all the carbon sloshing around the atmosphere. So this issue then of how to fundamentally, in some senses, reposition our species with respect to the world around us, I think it will necessitate, at least it's the way it seems to me. I have no idea, of course, if this will actually work out, but it seems to me a necessary condition, not sufficient, but a necessary condition, is to really reshape and reconsider at a profound level our way of thinking about the future, and to, as many of you have heard me say, to stop, and I've done this myself for many years as a practitioner, subsuming our discussions of the future always within the strategic. And that's where I was trying to go with this critique of the short-termism, long-termism, is that we have this kind of desire for a strategic imperative. We have to abide by a strategic imperative, and it's got it can have nasty sides to it, but it's got a very altruistic side to it as well. The strategies we want to pursue are meant to be beneficial in the future. How nice, how kind we are to be trying to take care of future generations. That's really, we're to be lauded, to feel responsible and morally correct. But if you flip that on its head, the short-termism of strategy, which is meant to be long-term, to put it kind of in its paradoxical way, is I think a significant part of the problem, and that means thinking of the long term, in a way that I have difficulty describing. Honestly, I mean, I think our language, our way of thinking, as usual when it comes to paradigmatic changes, is limited, is inadequate, and I'm continuously bumping into my own reflexes, habits, forms of speech, manners of persuasion, methods for the phraseology for being convincing, that betray and then are not consistent with what I'm trying to get at here, which is that the zero footprint legacy, which is probably not very easy to achieve, by the way, but I mean the zero footprint legacy, whereby I really think of how I live now, including, to make it kind of organic and compost related, the making sure that I'm good compost so that I'm not toxic, Although, who knows, the toxic could play a role, a positive role by, through ecosystem change. But in my own thinking, I don't want to be toxic now. In other words, let's say I value biodiversity. Let's say I value non-patriarchal, non-racist ways of being. And by living that and by showing my commitment, the only legacy I leave is that vague whisper, that gift that I would hope to give of, if we are this way, then we're in some senses in harmony. In some senses, and by harmony I don't mean permanency. I mean we're in harmony with birth and death, with endings and beginnings. We're in harmony with values in practice now, and not using some sort of goal or end or strategic objective as the justification for what we're doing, but rather using the way we are as the expression of a gift that may or may not be useful for whatever happens in the future. So it's kind of abolishing the dualism of short-term, long-term is what I'm talking about. And I think quite a few of you have heard me talk about this before, and I felt that it was useful to kind of add this to the mix of the summit, because there is a huge pressure to respond in ways that seem policy relevant. How are we going to deal with the lack of inclusiveness of so much of what's going on, the inequality, the oppression, and what are our choices that are going to make a difference for that? And I have to say that I feel that this make a difference imperative is fairly tyrannical, but tyrannical by the sense that it locks us into a form of short-termism, long-termism that, well, but as far as I can tell, just doesn't work, for one thing, in the sense that it creates a lot of things that we don't want. And on the other hand, denies us a lot of meaning. And I guess that's kind of the other direction to go in here, is that in the alienated state of the current of our species, for the most part today, the difficulty of finding meaning is symptomatic of a very deep problem. So most of you know that my view on all this is that, and I've said it already, is that we're just beginning to sort this out. I don't know what it was like, and I'm not a historian by training, when human communities started to read and write, when writing was invented. And when all of a sudden you could leave a tablet, and the tablet would be a legacy, a message, your voice, into the future. I think undoubtedly that had profound impacts on the way in which we approached the future and understood the future. And I see reading and writing as probably the most powerful general human choice. So as a species, we've chosen, for the most part, almost everybody, to make reading and writing important. But anticipation, as a characteristic of all living organisms, and as a particularly striking characteristic of humans, in the sense that we have an imagination, and therefore we're able to imagine, recount fictions related to the future, which, by the way, a cat that waits for a mouse presumably is also recounting that fiction, in the sense that they've got a scenario where the mouse will come out of the hole in the wall or whatever. So we're not the only living species that has imagination, but we're particularly prolific and probably pretty nasty with our imagination in many ways, including the fact that our imagination makes us very frightened. But we don't have to structure our imagination, I think, the way we do, and I think we can learn that, and in fact take an approach which is rooted in a rather hands-off way of thinking about wisdom. Because my impression is that if we continue to apply maturity models rather than kind of forced march teaching models, where we push learning at the impressionable and vulnerable and powerless young, we really abuse our positions of power and force the young to swallow the learning we push on them. But if we took a wisdom approach, which is really a little bit more patient, perhaps a little more indirect, and also much more unknowable in terms of what its outcomes are, we could be in a position to integrate this way of thinking that takes us beyond short versus long term, which takes us beyond or just abandons the conception of agency and identity and self, rooted in preservation, duration, hierarchy, so status, and the sustaining of status. Because I think in experience, the pleasures and the ups and downs and the fullness and the richness and the diversity of experience gradually opens us up to being able to walk on two legs, meaning to be able to use the future, both from the point of view of planning and risk, but also to really be confident, but not preemptive, with respect to uncertainty and novelty and the creativity of the universe. But we're just at the beginning of this. We probably can't go too quickly. And building up futures literacy as a capability has to be something that we need to do on all fronts, in the sense, the same way that learning to read and write. I mean, it took how many centuries for reading and writing to become, I guess, generally understood, and then how many we're still working to try and make sure that everybody can read and write. And we're studying how that happens, the neurology, the pedagogy. Futures literacy and the underlying analytical, theoretical framework related to anticipatory systems and processes is something that we're just starting to explore, really. And so we're going to have to build it up step by step, and there'll be a lot of experiments that fail. But I think that it opens up the prospect, and I'll end here, of something that I find hopeful, not from the point of view of hope as a way of imposing some particular outcome on the future, but hopeful from the point of view of capability, which is when my children learn how to do something, when they learn to read and write, for instance, I didn't think, oh, well, now they're going to be able to read Shakespeare, but of course, that would be nice. But I thought, well, now they're capable. What they're going to do with it is up to them. And I have, of course, a lot of faith and I say it, faith, just confidence, blind confidence, that they will use the capabilities in ways that they believe are fit. And if I've set an example, and they have been able to see from the way I live my life and the way I relate to the world around me, then those capabilities are open for them to use in ways that make sense to them. And I just have confidence that they will do what's right in their way of thinking. Because we have to remember, values change hugely, and they can change fairly quickly as well. So this is kind of the hope that I feel when I think about changing the conditions of change by developing futures literacy. So I'll stop there, and maybe there's folks who want to ask some questions or express their opinions.
Hello, Riel. Can you hear me back?
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, people have been writing a lot since you started. So not sure, can you look at the comments?
Yep.
Yeah, perfect. So you can go and any of them and develop and elaborate on any of them. And I will just, as you do, put them on the screen so everyone is able to read them when you do it.
Put them on the screen.
I do that just by clicking on them, or even you. I think you can click on them and they appear on the screen.
Okay. So I'm just gonna pick out kind of one of the things. Antonio asks, and I don't know if I click on it. Antonio asks, to what extent should strategic foresight consider also path dependency, practices of the past? So thank you, Antonio, for that question, and I pick on it because I want to try and talk a little bit about what I would call the diversity of futures thinking. I think obviously strategic foresight needs to consider path dependency, but I would say that at least in most examples and most uses of strategic foresight, path dependency is exactly what it's about. In other words, it's a way of thinking about the past and projecting it into the future. It's a way of thinking about trends. It's the very important and useful futures cone that starts from the past and then extrapolates out in one way or another into the future. And that kind of, that's one form of path dependency. The concrete that's all around us is another form of path dependency, in the sense that it just imposes its presence on us, and radioactive waste as well, where we just have to cope with it. But so too, but we're also dependent on forests and agriculture and all sorts of things. There's so much that comes with us from the past. But the element that I'm trying to suggest, I think, around futures literacy is that we don't need to be constrained by the path dependency of planning. So here's one of the biggest assumptions, and the one that I've encountered through my entire career for over 30 years now, well over 30 years, working with people to design processes to think about the future, is the assumption that the reason we're thinking about the future and the kinds of futures we want to imagine must be useful for making choices, decisions that will influence the future. That path dependency, I think, really needs to be broken. Now, it's not the path dependency that strategic foresight is going to break, because strategic foresight is about planning the future. And therefore, it sits within the category, if you look at the futures literacy framework that is in the book Transforming the Future, it's within that assumption of anticipation for the future, which is the category, is inherent to strategic foresight, because it's strategic. That's what the word strategy means. And of course, it's very important. But if we want to move outside that and also sort of break from the path dependency of anticipation for the future as the way of thinking about the future, we need to try to understand and figure out what it means to use the future not for the future. And I mean, these days I've kind of been saying, it's almost, one of the ways to think about it would be the hallucinatory, orthogonal, disruptive ways of conjuring up images of the future. And I say images of the future because they're simply later than now. You have to understand that the Delphic oracle's hallucinations on the basis of vapors that were confounding, mysterious, and inspirational in ancient Greece, they weren't about the past, although they might have been interpretations of the past. But the crucial thing that the person seeking the Delphic oracle's advice on or insight was about the future. But the fact that that future was completely unrelated to whether or not it could be caused to happen, could be created, could be planned, could be the result of human agency making a difference to achieve that outcome. The future there was, a wild, disposable hallucination, and in that sense, perhaps it puts us in a more humble position, or maybe just a crazier position. So the wild beyond our fences, as Bayo Akomalefe would say. And that path dependency is the one that I was trying to talk about with the short-termism versus long-termism. So I hope that's helpful, Antonio, to address that question. Let's see.
Riel, we have here one from Wayland that seems very interesting. You see it on the screen now?
Yeah, good, great, thank you. Thanks for helping out, Miguel. Indeed, but I want to take a little step back from that one. Okay, so let's assimilate the word corporate to organism, cell. A cell in the body, or a cell, or a unit in an ecosystem. Would it have been good if the dinosaurs, as a form of cell, had been super agile and managed to overcome all the obstacles and live forever, be immortal, still be around? Well, I mean, it's a little bit of a caricatured version of this. But what I'm trying to say here is that there's a part of agile which is also related to the question of resilience and sustainability that I think is not only unattainable but not worth attaining. Meaning, I don't see why specific organisms should live forever and be agile in the sense of always being able to adapt. One of the things that I think futures literacy might allow us to do is to die gracefully a lot better. I mean, just to stop being zombies. There's so many zombies around. I mean, wonder why zombies are popular are prevalent in popular culture. I mean, the living dead. We don't want more agile zombies. So that's just a step back to say that I think that there's an important issue here about, and that goes for the nation state, that goes for the governments or the state as an instantiation of collective power, collective property rights and commons. These things are not, from my point of view, are not meant to be immortal, not meant. I mean, it doesn't make sense to embrace the idea that they should be immortal, because it just puts us in opposition to the creativity of the universe. On the other hand, and curiously enough, and slightly disturbing, I think, from our point of view, exhausting all the possibilities of staying alive could be, could be a pretty powerful kind of evolutionary strategy. But as some of you may know, I've argued for another approach to resilience, which has to do with diversification. Now, that doesn't mean, by the way, that the diversification strategy will be the winning strategy. It is possible that by putting all your chips on 23, or is it 42, that you'll win the big lottery. But of course, a diversification strategy does give you a lot more chances of turning out to be in the right place at the right time. And of course, you might not be at all in the right place at the right time on any of your bets. But diversification has the virtue not only of having some, I think, positive spin-offs for adaptation, resilience, transformation, and in that sense, agility. But it also has, I think, a hugely positive aspect for meaning, and the meaning of being alive, which is the ability to appreciate difference. So in this sense, diversity that originates from our capacity to be creative, because we can identify difference and create difference, we're diversifying the world around us. This is ontological expansion, as Ilka Toomey says. Then there's more to kind of appreciate, more to enjoy, more to play off of. So instead of being afraid of difference and lack confidence when confronted by difference, such as a pandemic that arrives, to develop the capability that says, no, this is the way to live with it and make it happen. But having said all that, there are plenty of ideas around agility that are easily summarized by a film like Black Hawk Down. For those of you who've seen it, where you see the difference between people who can learn on site, on the ground, and those who are locked into a predetermined plan. And so there are certainly ways to manage the disposition of our resources in such a way that we are not locked in to predetermined paths and outcomes. So there are ways for us to be much more agile, like a dancer or a tightrope walker. And then, of course, that's probably a good thing. But I don't think we should confuse that with the question of being so agile that you can live forever. So that's kind of the take I have on that. Miguel, you have another one for me?
Yes, we can have probably a couple more. So do you want to read and go through one, or choose one?
I see the last one there I see is decolonizing and foresight. How could one dance around both and enjoy the journey of striving, reaching? That's a fantastic question, Prashant. And the basic answer is I don't know. But the inkling I have, or the intuition from my own experience, is that improvisation requires spontaneity, and improvisation require both preparation and liberation. And negotiating the relationship between the two, I don't think can be done by a formula. So and this touches on both the issue of futures literacy as a big tent of all different kinds and ways of thinking about the future, all the range of different anticipatory systems and processes, and decolonizing in its double sense. Some of you who might know about the work we've been doing on the capacity to decolonize, which is trying to understand how our imagination is colonized by lots of forces. I mean, we're I think just the beginning of unpacking some of the forces and processes and habits that end up, which result in us having imaginations that have been colonized without us knowing or from other places. Not that that's bad necessarily, but not being aware of it is, I think, disempowering. And then the other part is about colonizing the future, which is our efforts to impose on the future what we think is good for the future. That double decolonization, to my mind, rests on being able to understand anticipation for the future and anticipation for emergence. And since terminologically, but this is just a convention, the term foresight and strategic foresight, I think, make more sense, both in terms of practice, but also linguistically, as part of anticipation for the future and not really anticipation for emergence. It means that we have to have a broader base to do all of that. I'll stop with on this point, just say, the anticipation for emergence is still something that's quite difficult for us to do. And so it doesn't seem obvious at first what that means. And we've had a discussion, some of the discussion on LinkedIn about not doing and not doing, in an article by Lou Stamhoff that was recently on Medium. I mean, these are areas which are not new for human reflection, but I think in some senses are difficult to integrate into the dominant paradigm. And in that sense, they speak to me to the need to actually break from the dominant paradigm. But all of us, I think, know that paradigmatic change is complicated and difficult and takes time. So that's a bit of a comment on this relationship between decolonizing and foresight. What's next, Miguel?
Yes, we have the last one. I think that there is a very interesting one, and I'm gonna put it on screen, just out of the blue. So this is Sally asking if it sounds like nature and biological systems already have the clues we need, but we are not advanced or sensitive or imaginative to know how to use this knowledge. And I know you and me, we've been talking about this lately a couple of times already. So what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of the message from the planet in a sense. But I mean, so I struggle with this a lot because be that as it may, child of the 1960s and 70s and the 20th century, and its ideological and colonizing imperatives. Obviously, most of what I'm doing runs the risk of being precisely what I denounce, which is to try and change something because I think it will be better. And clearly, in nature, there's a great, there's a great deal of change and novelty. In us too, we're not different from nature. I mean, we are a biological system layered with some aspects of virtuality or thought that are intangible and very interesting, ontologically existing, but intangible, that adds a dimension that I don't think we completely know how to take into account. But for me, it's not so much, I mean, being sensitive to the and using the knowledge. So mimetism and all the rest are very important. But I think, as I've already suggested, there's something we have to come to terms with from the point of view of feeling like we've done what we could to make the world safe for our progeny, and also, have we followed the commandments that we've invented? In other words, there's a deep fear, I think, that if we don't follow the commandments, we won't reproduce the world as we'd like to see it. And I think being able to distance ourselves from that is something we have to experiment a lot with. And I'll end with this point, Miguel. I think an assemblage perspective, in other words, a perspective that's not hierarchical and not causal in the conventional ways that we think, an assemblage perspective on emergence, repetition, and difference will hopefully be very helpful in allowing us to not only learn from everything around us, which includes the biology, but also allows us to put ourselves in a position where we're not trying to control the world or the future.
That is a very wise advice. Sometimes I do feel like the future is a very holistic approach to our position in the whole system, in the planet. And then we get the other side, the side of the, okay, but we are also working and doing this and corporates and doing the other side. And then we are busy in our own societies and all this abstraction of culture we created around everything over the simple real life of animals and plants that are a little bit simpler than us. So, Riel, thank you so much for a very insightful presentation. Thank you for being here another year, and hope to count you in for the next year. So it seems that we are going to be doing this every year now on. So thank you so much. And everyone else, you keep on the page, and we are going exactly on a round table now on the future of Foresight communities.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Miguel.